The Let Kashmir Decide movement is bringing to you a brand new show on JKTV where you will get the latest updates and analysis into the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
Modi and the Indian government want the world to believe that all is well in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but that is decidedly not the case. Join us and different guests every Thursday for insight into the latest developments in the Kashmiri freedom struggle.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here again tonight. Apologies for the late start, a few technical island issues with the internet, but we are here. So I'm here again with Mary Scully from the USA, human rights activist and political writer. And we have guests with us tonight.
Well, you can just call me Laura since that's my first name. I mean, I go by Asenwe Maritia, which are my middle names on social media, but usually people have problems with it. So Laura works, I think, mostly in spoken media.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's lovely to see you here and welcome. Laura is Let Kashmir Decide USA representative and has been for 2 years and is very, very active as human rights activist, social activist, and is a whiz on Twitter. I couldn't do without her knowledge as well. So I've known Laura for a long time and it's lovely to welcome you here tonight. How are you tonight?
Oh, well, it's about mid-afternoon here. So, I mean, I'm good.
That's good. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, we're heading, I've just passed my tea time, so that's good. And Mary, how are you this week?
I'm good, very good.
Brilliant. So we're going to be discussing tonight in particular then in our insight into Indian-occupied Kashmir, the fake encounters, the encounters where the Indian army are coming in and we're seeing effectively the butchering of youths, the locking up of innocents and families and people having to do them without their young people. There is still plenty of young people missing as well. And it seems to be a tactic that the Indian army and the military are using to further their narrative and their discourse that they are dealing with armed people in resistance or terrorists in resistance to standing their ground. So I'm going to, as usual, put it over to Mary to discuss and ask the questions and go into discussion with Laura. And then I will come in and join in if I feel I have anything of value to add. So thank you. And Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Claire and I thought it would be, you're very knowledgeable about a lot of things, and we thought it would be really useful to elaborate for those people who are not clear, non-Kashmiris who don't know exactly what the character of the freedom struggle is. If you could elaborate today about the character of what the Indian Army calls cordon and search operations and what most Kashmiris refer to as fake encounters. These used to be maybe once or twice a week. They were frequent, but they were not a constant as they are now. After General Bipin Rawat came in, he was the architect of in 2019 of almost daily, if not multiple, CASO operations or fake encounters every single day. So we thought you could begin by going into a description of what these cordon and search operations or fake encounters, what the character of them is, the military character.
Well, I'm a U.S. Army retired chief warrant officer, and as somebody who is sworn to uphold and protect the U.S. Constitution, among those is Article 6 regarding our international agreements, I can speak a little bit from that point of view as a retired military person myself. Is that even in cases where there's considered an occupation of within an international border, although Kashmir is really disputed territory, the Fourth Geneva Convention still applies. Common Article 3 of the Fourth Geneva Convention still applies. And India is violating it. India is committing war crimes, even though they consider the land they are occupying to be their integral territory, even though it's not. And they forfeited that right to consider it that under the instrument of accession when they accepted the UN determination that Kashmir was disputed territory. So, so let's just be clear about that from the legal point of view. A cordon and search operation is when they cordon off an area, an inhabited area, and what they generally do is that the Indian forces will take all the men out of the houses and will go through and ransack and search the houses and maybe harass the women or humiliate the women, or maybe even worse. Like in the account of, I believe it was like the mass rape in 1990 or 1993. So that's what they mean by CASO, cordon and search, is just that procedural doing that. And it was under one of those circumstances in which I think was in Pushpura that the Indian forces committed mass rapes of the female inhabitants of the area that they were searching after they, took all the men out and away from their households. So, and rape when committed by occupying forces is a war crime. So, and that's a very important point, is that, just because it's considered to be, within an international boundary, I mean, it's disputed territory and it is an occupied territory, and the Geneva Conventions don't ignore that. So that's what the cordon and search operations are. Fake encounters are encounters where innocent Kashmiri youths, young men mostly, maybe even not so young, are killed by Indian security forces on the pretense of being terrorists or militants, and then their bodies may be hidden or any evidence hidden, where forensic investigation might indicate a different conclusion, that no, these people are not as India claims them to be. And one of the issues of, and is as if that were not troubling enough, because the Indian government has offered bounties on the heads of Kashmiri militants and terrorists killed. It basically monetizes their deaths. It creates a market for killing Kashmiri men. And in the interest of making money, in the interest of capitalizing on it, they're not all that discriminate about whether or not these men are actually involved in those kinds of activities. And even if they were, there is this little thing we like to call due process, that even a people under military occupation would be entitled to due process. So these are extrajudicial killings, also a war crime. So that, and to maybe bring it home a little bit for maybe like the people in the US, part of it could maybe be compared to Texas's abortion ban law, SB 8, in which private citizens are encouraged to file civil suits against those suspected of being abortion providers, or those seeking abortion if it's after, this very stringent, like 6-week period of gestation. So then you're creating a market for false allegations. You're creating a market for these kinds of disruptions into people's lives. And another comparison, it's not the most accurate analogy at the same level when we're talking extrajudicial murder, but also like being able to monetize prison labor for private sector businesses. So then you're creating a market for incarcerated people. And the US has the highest rate, the highest percentage of our population is incarcerated, more so than any other country. And as outraged as people are about that, about monetizing incarceration, and the incarceration, especially if it's for felonies like with 3 strikes you're out, that also affects suffrage. So as outraged as people are about these things, they should be exponentially more outraged at bounties for killing put on the heads of innocent people. And even if they were militants, again, they should still, by international mores and laws and legal conventions, be entitled to due process. And vigilantism is not due process. So, I mean, that's maybe the best way that I could explain it.
Yes, I actually think that the placing the bounty on the heads of young men for Indian soldiers, I think it actually fits into the whole war on terror ideology, because part of India's narrative, of the Indian government's narrative, is that terrorism, quote, terrorism, is a problem in Kashmir. And they need almost 1 million soldiers there in order to quell the terrorist uprising. So I think that the bounty is part of that narrative. I wonder if you could talk about how India's narrative, how Indian ideology and theoretics about to justify their occupation, how it fits into the general war on terror strategy, which seems to be effective in China, in Israel, in all of the Middle East wars, in Yemen, Syria, Iraq. It's the modus operandi, it's the gestalt, it's the justification for those wars. And I wonder if you could talk about how those fake encounters, those queso operations fit into that whole war on terror ideology.
Well, under federal law, the U.S. State Department, in the law concerning some of its dealings, terrorism is defined as violent acts by a clandestine organization against innocent civilians with the intent of effecting political change. Now, what is really disingenuous is framing militants as terrorists if their targets are almost solely drawn from what they call lawful combatants. And under the definition of the Geneva Convention, if you're in a command structure and if you're in a uniform, in your conventional military force, and if you're engaged in a military operation, you are a lawful combatant. You do not fall under the definition of civilian, so you are not a victim of terrorism. You are a victim of maybe an insurgency, but you're not necessarily a victim of a terrorist operation. So, and the militants, I mean, if they operated clandestinely, it still wouldn't make them terrorists because their targets are lawful combatants. So that is a really important distinction to make, is that a lot of times when there's this accusation of terrorism, when you look at who is being targeted, if they are lawful combatants, then calling it terrorism is really deceitful. And also, I think it was from maybe the 70s, I think it was a former Secretary of State, Brzezinski in the US, who said that whole narrative of Muslim terrorists was designed as a narrative framing to justify just blanket justification for military operations in Islamic countries who coincidentally were former colonial possessions of imperial powers who still covet the resources located within those countries, usually like oil, or some, I mean, usually it's oil or something like that. So, and also the whole framing as terrorists also creates this narrative way of manipulation and control, where the people being blanketly accused who are innocent of this often feel that they have to pull punches and they have to be more conciliatory in their language in the pursuit of justice for their grievances, or maybe not even pursue justice for their grievances at all, because they don't want to be framed as being volatile or difficult. So their minds are colonized with this fear that if they stick up, they're going to get nailed down, and they're going to be, it's like, oh well, so they are discouraged from speaking out. So it's also a matter of manipulation, because I see punches being pulled all the time on social media, where me as a white American lady and a military veteran, I can get away with saying things and making assertions that, hey, military forces are lawful combatant targets. I mean, if I would have been in Afghanistan, I was never deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq. I was never deployed to a theater of military operations. But if I had been, I would have been a legitimate target. I wouldn't have liked it, and I would not have agreed with the premise of me being there. And I don't vote, partly because I'm a veteran, for policies that encourage gunboat mercantilism and foreign interventionism, but it is what it is. And so for India to claim that, oh, these are terrorist attacks, and therefore we have to be there, as though the targets were civilian when they are lawful combatants. And then they also assert this narrative as, we're there to protect the Kashmiri people from these militants. No, they're not. No, they're not. Or we have to protect the rights of the religious minorities there. It's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. Your presence there is creating a suspicion of collaboration. This is actually compounds the suspicions and the possibility of violence against religious minorities if they are perpetually under the suspicion of being collaborators. And so, in a manner of speaking, India is holding these religious minorities, like the Pandits, as political hostages, saying, well, we have to be there to protect them. It's like, no, you're compounding the problems against them when you do that. And it's the same thing that Israel does with LGBT people, saying, oh, well, Palestine is persecuting gay people. It's like, well, maybe don't, if you care so much about LGBT people, maybe try to not recruit them as collaborators spying against their own families. And also this idea of, well, we're there to protect the rights of LGBT people. It's like, well, the rights of gender equality and the rights of LGBT equality are just about never advanced under circumstances of perpetual existential crisis. If a society is under a threat and not stable and not peaceful, where is there going to be the rhetorical space where people have the luxury of advancing these kinds of rights? So it's like they create India and Israel, they create these existential crises that prevent the advancement of these rights. And then they proclaim, oh, well, we have to occupy, we're morally superior because we don't put people under those circumstances. Well, that's actually not true in India.
And I think, Laura, I think you make some really good points. And it really, I don't know what the word is, fascinates me or intrigues me, how India seemed to think, or the Indian military, that people are blinded by the fact that they are there just to deal with, as we're saying, so-called terrorists, when it's obvious, you know, to me or anybody watching, it's absolutely obvious. And I think that's really quite insightful, Laura, to say, you know, that they're stopping the advancement of anything else occurring within a growing society. We're constantly just dealing, aren't we, Mary, with the same issue of cordon and search and death and terrorism, why they're there and what we're doing, with nothing else allowed to grow. I think even education, we are seeing suffering, you know, so many different things that are suffering for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because the advancement of women's rights in the U.S. didn't take place. I mean, we got suffrage in 1920. Well, 1920. I mean, we weren't in the middle of a war. We weren't having to deal with threats, and also, and this seems to be quite true in patriarchal societies, is that when there is a perceived existential threat from the outside, then women become relegated to being a procreative asset. Like if a society is under a threat of genocide or under a threat of annihilation, you're not going to want to expose your procreative assets to any possible threat of ending up in enemy hands, where the enemy can use them to propagate their own DNA. And so these kind of situations of this perceived threat also act in the diminishment of women's rights, and you see that parallel even among white supremacists. White supremacists, among the things they get told as part of their doctrine, is that they are a bulwark against this conspiracy of so-called white genocide. And so it's no coincidence that white supremacists also tend to be male supremacists and want to abridge women's rights and women's participation in the socioeconomic mainstream, because they're fed this diet of, well, we can't have our women exposed to the possibility of outsider men possibly procreating with them, so we got to keep them at home barefoot and impregnated with our babies.
Can we?
Yeah, we can see
we're going a little bit off here. We need to get back to
there's a good comment there up on the screen just now, you know, about the United Nations alongside the UK and the USA. And as we're trying to get at a very, what's the word, familiar level, something that it could be happening to us. It could be us. And here we are with these fake encounters, cordon and search, and limiting of society happening. And the world leaders are saying nothing. The UK are saying nothing. United Nations are very silent. We know they've sent them letters to India. We know they've condemned. We know they've urged, but there's very little else going on. So, Mary, I'll throw that back to you on those thoughts.
Well, because you're interested in the issue of women, Laura, perhaps you could talk about the particular problems that the Indian occupation is giving to Kashmiri women. You mentioned Kunan and Pashpura, the mass rape, but it's in general an issue, the question of sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, all sorts of mass rape as a weapon of war. And Kashmiri feminists played a leading role internationally, I think, in exposing and educating about the role of rape as a weapon of war. And they have now, of course, been forcibly silenced along with all the other human rights activists in Kashmir. So maybe you could talk about that whole question of how the occupation of India particularly affects the women of Kashmir.
Well, among those issues is that women not feeling that they're safe to participate in the socioeconomic mainstream. I mean, if they feel like they're in danger from sexual harassment or rape, how can they leave the house to pursue an education or employment? And then the Indian government turns around and says, oh, well, Kashmiri society isn't allowing women to go outside, isn't allowing women to pursue these things, when the occupation itself is the reason that the women don't feel that they are safe to do that. And also as a military tactic, one of the things that we're taught as far as achieving decisive victory is attacking what they call a society's center of mass, where the society, if something is attacked that is very important to them, then they would break their will to fight. And among these things, in societies where sexual access is traded on, where virginity is valued as a matter of honor and as a matter of as a condition of getting married, mass rape is actually, maybe quite an effective weapon of war, because in the aftermath of this, what is the status of those female victims at that point? I mean, is by the society standards, are they going to be marriageable? Are they going to be possibly pregnant with an enemy's, an occupier's baby? Are they going to be vilified as collaborators for something that was engaged in against their will? So, I mean, those are also really troubling issues in the aspect of rape being used as a weapon of war. And it's most effective in societies where virginity and is that matter of family honor. I mean, because what is going to be the status of that woman? And then if if the society perpetrating this understands that, then it also figures into their campaign of genocide. It's like, okay, we have removed a potential procreative asset from that society. So in effect, reducing their population in favor of our desired demographic. I mean, India is not ignorant of these things.
No, it's a very carefully thought out strategy in Kashmir. It isn't just an eclectic happenstance. It's a very carefully thought out strategy. Can you talk about these massive crackdowns lately on journalists in Kashmir, on human rights activists like Khurram Parvez, on protesters, where protests are now out loud? They were almost daily up until 2019, even after 2019. Could you talk about that in terms of the massive number of political prisoners? As you say, mostly young men, or mostly men for the most part, although also women, but a very young, lots of young people that are hauled in under the Public Safety Act. If you could just talk about that whole issue.
Well, it's not even journalists trying to work expressly within Kashmir. I mean, because there's actually even the issue of how many foreign journalists are even allowed to work in Kashmir, and foreign journalists maybe being harassed by government of India forces there. But also even journalists outside of Kashmir expressing concern about it, like Rana Ayub, she's one of them, and maybe a few others getting attacked online, getting death threats, getting rape threats. And again, these rape threats as a means to specifically target women from speaking up because of this prospect. I mean, that's a very unique attack that's targeted against women. And so the fact that these kinds of threats are made undermines India's claims of being so much any more advanced than Kashmir on the issue of gender equality. If rape threats are a go-to response to a woman daring to speak out and report about these things. And also India cracked down. Well, I wouldn't say crack down, because crack down implies a possible justification, but India had also targeted Amnesty International's offices and froze their funds, likely in retaliation for their reports, not just on Kashmir, but also on communal violence and violence against women and violence against lower castes. So, and then recently, Mother Teresa's charity has been prohibited from receiving foreign funds, as well as part of a concerted campaign against Christians in India. So, I mean, and the Public Safety Act, I mean, I can't speak a lot to that because I don't know all the details about that. I find that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which gives Kashmiri, or which gives Indian forces the ability to act with impunity, not only in Kashmir, but also in Assam. I mean, I find that would be really, I mean, that couldn't even happen in the US because of how unconstitutional that would be, because it's basically saying, it's basically like the equivalent of sending federal troops to Native American reservations. And that is actually kind of what the status of a union territory is when they're saying, oh, Kashmir is no longer a semi-autonomous state, it's a union territory. So then Kashmir is governed directly out of Delhi, like how Native American reservation lands are held in trust by the US government. So they're not even treated as citizens within a democracy. And if Kashmir was an integral part of India, when you take away its legislative body like that, how is India a democracy if part of India doesn't have that kind of representation, if they are not treated with the status of a state with a representative body?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really good points. I wanted to go back to the thing you mentioned there about Amnesty International in India being closed down. I mean, one of the things that we found, like it went through on legislation in Amnesty in the UK over a year ago, that they were going to try and work to send in a human rights envoy, gather the evidence that we need to see. But what was really crucial to that work was having Amnesty International in India, because that was the base that they would use from, where people would go in and be able to support that work. By taking out Amnesty India as it wasn't just the work in India that it stopped, but whole internationally. And even now it's a challenge for Amnesty International, I think, to kind of find their way back.
Well, and not just Amnesty International, but UNIP. I mean, the UN itself is hamstrung in its ability to investigate and report because of India's restrictions on them. I mean, you don't really see that on the Pakistan side of the line of control, but you see it in India.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and very well said. Mary, shall I put it back over to you? Oh, hang on, you're on mute. Sorry, I've muted you.
I know that you're involved also in Palestinian solidarity work. I wonder, because of this new cartel that India has formed, it's a more deep, much more complicated relationship that they formed with Israel, with Dubai, and with the United States. They have a new group, a quartet of some kind. I wonder if you could talk about what that means, that new relationship means, or that intensified relationship means for both Palestinians and Kashmiris, and also if you think that it extends the possibilities for collaborative work between the Kashmiri solidarity movement and the Palestinian solidarity movement. So the problems that presents for Kashmiris and Palestinians, and then what it means for the work that we do.
Well, Israel never met a genocide that it didn't want to arm, whether it was selling arms to Kashmir, whether it was selling weapons to Myanmar, Bosnia, well, Serbia to use against Muslim Bosniaks, or Rwanda. So to me, that's unsurprising. And not only that, India had used Israeli software to spy on pro-Kashmir activists. I've even seen, and I've seen tweets about, India's with Israel, or Israel's with India. So, again, that's not surprising. But there's also another issue that will be an impediment as far as moving forward, and that is the U.S. irrational hostilities with China. It's not to say that China is 100% perfect or above reproach, but the fact is that the U.S. has been cultivating India as a possible platform, as far as including them in Indo-PACOM, as a bunch of dispensable people that they could throw against China, and possibly maybe even and using the northern tier of India as maybe like an operational platform against China, using somebody, amassing these allies against China. And China is their own, they use soft power in the form of their mercantilism, as far as they're trying to achieve control over natural resources in other countries. They use soft power to do that. They use infrastructure development projects in other countries and loans to other they use debt trap diplomacy to do that, where NATO and specifically the US tend to use gunboat mercantilism to accomplish control over local resources. So the US, the Western hostilities toward China, and then wanting to array a coalition against China, whereas Pakistan has been seeking, because they are involved in CPEC, and they're involved in the Belt and Road Initiative and the OBAR, the One Belt One, or the One Belt One Road, is that Kashmir in the middle of that has territory that would be useful, that could be availed to provide these transit corridors useful to China. And the US, instead of wanting to cultivate our own economy, our own development, our own infrastructure, the government is willing to expend more resources in kneecapping China, which means taking India into its embrace, giving Pakistan the cold shoulder, and not willing to allow the possibility of that they think it maybe works territorially for Western interests against China to be in alliance with India, and have even Kashmir, and especially like Ladakh, as a possible future operational platform to use against India, or surveillance, or to use against China, and to avail themselves against China. So I think that's part of the reason why the West is silent on some of these atrocities committed by India, is because they see India as a potential bulwark against Chinese economic expansion.
Yeah, so basically we are, that's the international perspective, isn't it, that is keeping us. Can you hear music?
Yeah.
Can you hear music? I've got some music playing somewhere and I have to turn it off. Hang on.
Here comes Santa Claus. Here comes Santa Claus.
I thought it's going in my head. Oh, I just need to ignore it. I'll go back and sort it in a minute. Yeah, and I think, to pull it back then to ordinary people and back onto the ground. And somebody's asked a question up here, which brings it back to the fake encounters. And he says, how come a young boy of teens joins a group and gets killed within a few days or a month? What is India's main agenda here? And is it just a slow genocide of Kashmiris? So I'll put that over to both of you, or what's happening.
Well, I think it is an attempt at shifting the demographic. And as far as being killed after a few days, I think over a year ago, a Kashmiri Facebook friend from India occupied Kashmir was, when we were talking about strategies and tactics for militancy, I mean, they're under restrictions. Like if he were missing for a few days, his parents would have to report him being missing. I mean, if they couldn't account for his whereabouts, they were obliged to report it to the government or to the police that their son was missing. And also, there was a woman on Twitter who works, I guess, in some kind of computer science or cybersecurity, mentioning that that separatists have developed some very predictable patterns in their, what we call in signals intelligence, the message externals, the patterns of, you don't even have to really discern the content of the message traffic, but knowing the patterns of who is contacted when and through what means, that if there are patterns that can be associated with certain kinds of activities, then that's a lot of times how those sorts of things are found out, is that you don't even if you had encrypted messages, if you're only doing something like, oh, well, we're going to plan this operation, so we're going to do it on like Telegram. Well, the fact that there's a spike in traffic in Telegram, even though the content isn't known, that's an indicator to Indian intelligence that there's something that's going to be happening. I mean, because that is basically how SIGINT analysis works. So I mean, these guys getting killed after a few days, and they're not really trained. They don't have any kind of training. They don't have any like legal status as lawful combatants. They're not organized in a way where they can operate clandestinely. I mean, to me, it seems like a very romantic endeavor, like they're seeking a romantic martyrdom, coupled with the things they do, the lapses in their communication and operational security that make them so easy to target.
Yes, I remember in 2016 that Khurram Parvez, who was not silenced at the time, was interviewed, and he said that there were probably still operating in Kashmir, I believe it was less than 200 armed combatants, armed operatives. And that was in 2016. There have been these massive, constant, daily fake encounters every day, where every day 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 young men are killed and then accused of being terrorists, and the families deny that. The families say that he was a young workman on his way trying to find work in Srinagar. One of them was a student trying to go into the town to get some papers certified for class. That in fact they had nothing to do with terrorism or with armed militancy, I should say. And I think it's what you pointed out, Laura, that there's a bounty on their heads. And so they are abducted very often, executed, set up, and then dumped in these graves so that there can be, as you also pointed out, no forensics investigations. And the families don't receive their bodies back for a long time. So,
well, and that's another thing with center of mass, is that not being able to do the proper, just as you had pointed out on Facebook, is that being denied your right to religious observance. That is also another kind of center of mass target to help undermine and destroy a community's will to resist.
To destroy the soul the spirit, the
Mm-hmm.
know, the resistance. So yes, I often think, I know there have been for decades long debates about the efficacy of guerrilla warfare as a strategy, and I think, like, if you look at the Vietnamese struggle, the Vietnamese had not only guerrilla warfare operatives, an extensive system of guerrilla warfare, but they had an army that had been well trained for 40 years in the fight against French colonialism before the United States invaded Vietnam. So it's not that there's any sort of moral objection, at least on my part, to the character of guerrilla warfare. It's a question about the efficacy in a place like Kashmir, where there are almost 1 million Indian soldiers with an elaborate surveillance system against really, it cannot be, even today, more than a few hundred, as you say, badly armed, untrained young people that were discouraged by the occupation, discouraged by the extremes of violence that they experience on a daily basis, discouraged by the pace of the resistance, by the seeming loss, the setbacks that they face since 2019. And so certainly there would be young, idealistic, and often demoralized young people that would be attracted to guerrilla warfare. I don't call them terrorists. That's not how I see it.
I wouldn't either, because like I said, under US law, they wouldn't be considered terrorists.
No.
I mean, as far as efficacy goes, in areas that were under Nazi occupation, there still were partisans, there were guerrillas. I mean, as far as asymmetric warfare goes, Kashmiri resistance could be more effective. It could be better organized. Among the impediments is martyrdom being considered such a romantic thing. But in seeking martyrdom, I mean, one isn't even, if you're killed after like 2-3 days, you're basically a statistic. If you're going to seek martyrdom, hopefully you would do it in pursuit of something like a major sabotage operation or something that would inflict harm upon occupation operations.
I don't really believe that they're seeking martyrdom. I don't think that they're foolish. I just think that it's young people who have become overwhelmed with the the crimes are just horrific. They're demoralized, they're overwhelmed by that, and they want to do something. They don't see much point in living under occupation. I think they're very often idealistic, very idealistic.
Well, right, and it attests to the indigeneity of the separatism, that it's not, one cannot simply tout it as a contrivance of Pakistan if, when these young indigenous men are so demoralized that it's like, well, what do they have to lose? What do they have to lose by fighting when there's really, what are you living for?
Well, it's certainly like, in the UK and the USA, this is nothing. They don't have to consider anything like this in their life at all. If you look at the way that our children experience and live their lives, and I think that's why we're all so passionate about this. So there, for the grace of God go I. Why should other people have to live their lives like that? I'm mindful, ladies, that we're nearly hitting the hour. And I know we often, we're seeking solutions as well and our way forwards. So just very quickly, I've got a video here that I would like to play. It is a raising awareness one. It is asking, where is the freedom of voice? Where is the democracy? Where is the justice? And urging people to help and get behind the Kashmiris write to their MP, write to United Nations. So I'm going to play that shortly. So just very quickly, Mary, with thoughts of just a brief discussion with Laura about where the solutions could lie to any of this going forward, and Laura's thoughts on that as well. Then we'll move to closing comments and then the video, and we'll finish up.
Yes, well, I just want to say that I think we should look at these young Kashmiris, not the young men who are framed up and executed as terrorists, but to look at these young people as the Kashmiris do. When the Kashmiris were able to protest, including holding funeral corteges for the people who had been assassinated, they held them in the highest esteem. And I think that we should also not impugn their motives, even to call them demoralized, that we should hold them in the highest esteem as martyrs to the cause of Kashmiri freedom. And I think that our job, as people from the West, is to continually point out not just the righteousness of the Kashmiri struggle, but the absolute importance of the Kashmiri struggle in politics today. It is one of the most important struggles going on in the world, along with the Palestinian struggle, those who are struggling against foreign wars, the Rohingya struggle, the Uyghur struggle. Those are the most important political struggles. And if they are triumphant over colonialism, over occupation, over genocide, they advance the cause of all of humanity. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. They advance the cause of freedom all over the world. So those struggles are extremely important, not only for the oppressed, but for those of us who are in solidarity with them. For the future of humanity as a whole, they're that important.
Well, one of the things that I think would be important in engendering empathy would be, like you said, and like Claire said, there, but for the grace of God go I. But what if it wasn't for the grace of God? Now, in the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, which was one of Britain's grievous moral errors, there was a movie that was made and put out and translated in like 18 languages called 100 Balfour Road. And called 100 because it was 100 years after the Balfour Declaration was set forth in 1917 by Lord Balfour, expressing the British government's support for a Jewish state in Palestine. And in this movie, what they did was they showed a parallel. It's like, what would this look like if this household of British people were intruded upon by another family? That it's like, oh, well, these people have no home now. And then the guy whose house ends up being taken over says, oh, well, that's really too bad. And then the military forces accompanying this other family, this ragged looking refugee family, is like, oh, well, you don't understand. We're giving them your house. And then everything that kind of cascades from that. When you see what it looks like happening to people who look like you, maybe people will understand and draw that parallel. And I have invoked the link to that video many times on social media, especially to people who tend toward the racist side. It's like, if you think this is horrible to watch happening, if you don't think this is okay to happen to non-white people, this is what it looks like. Would you be appalled if it happened to white people? Where is your empathy?
Yeah, and it could be happening to any one of us at any point. And I think that's what we want to try and do, is get these links to the power of the people. We empathize, we have the passion, we want to see it resolved, and we just need more people to come along with us. I'm going to play this video just now, and then we can wrap up the show after the end of that. Stay where you are, and we'll discuss in a minute. Thank you. So anybody out there, please listen, watch this, and share where you can, and do everything you can to help the Kashmiris to get their human rights. Thank you.
Just one dream can change a nation. Just one man can open a door. A single voice can be lost in time, but a million voices will be heard. Just one dream can change a nation. Just one man can open the door. A single voice will be lost in time, but a million voices will be heard. Just one dream can wake a nation. Just one man can break down a door. A single light can be lost in the dark, but a million lights will shine through the world. Just one dream can change a nation. Just one man can break down a door. A single light can be lost in the dark, but a million lights will shine through the world. Just one dream can change a nation. Just one man can break down a door. A single light can be lost in the dark, but a million lights will shine through the world. Just one dream can change a nation. Just one man can break down a wall. A single light can be lost in the dark, but a million lights will shine through the world. A million lights will shine through the
Here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think from that, what we really feel we need to do, every single person can make a difference. I don't want anybody watching this to think, well, it's happening over the other side of the world, we can't do anything. As people, we have so much power. One thing that we are doing just now then is joining every 5th of every month, Solidarity with Kashmir, where we have tea, we share the message with a friend, and we join together and share that word on social media. We're urging everybody out there, please, to join with us, unite with others. This is a human rights issue that needs to be overcome. We're working very hard and trying to analyse some of these issues, and hope that you will join us. Writing to your government representative is really important. Laura, what message out there would you have for the world and anybody listening to see this as an ordinary person, to try and see this issue resolved?
Well, we need to honor the self-determination struggles of Kashmiris and Palestinians and other peoples whose lands were allocated to other governments without their consent.
Yeah, very well said. And Mary, a message out there for people?
I would say that we should try to make 2020, the year 2022, as despite all the problems of the pandemic, we should try to make it a really important year for building solidarity with Palestinians, with Kashmiris, with the Rohingya, the Uyghur, and I think also to try to create unity between those movements so that we have a stronger movement, a stronger anti-colonial movement, because they're all very much tied together, not only through the war on terror, but through the fight against colonialism. So trying to
war
work
on terror.
What, did I missay that? Yes.
Well, the air quotes I think are,
Yes, okay,
kind of, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, difficult. It alludes back to a conversation we had earlier for anybody watching. No, absolutely. And I think that's it. The enthusiasm for the new year. We can do this. There are so many people out there. We have to get out to the mainstream media. And so that's raising awareness amongst all people. So, you know, starting off with the 5th and the Solidarity event, the New Year message and various demonstrations and things going on is really important. And then going forward, we've got the human rights mandate, the Let Kashmir Decide global mandate, which we're hoping to get people around. So, you know, it's good. Everybody, human rights person, anybody that cares about the world just needs to keep linking together, reaching out and all working together. So thank you so much for tonight's program. That was really insightful. I think we covered a lot of issues. And as always,
I learned a lot, Laura. Thank you.
Well, it's, you know, well, thanks. That military background does give a little different perspective.
Yes, it was quite useful.
I know, and it's an absolute honor to talk here with you, Laura. And then, you know, all the time we do solidify our links, don't we, with people? I mean, I know I've known you a long time, but it also brings you out to other people in the struggle, that we're all here, we can all help, and the strengths we have to offer. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Mary, lovely to see you again as well. And take care, and I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I didn't have the end music ready, Laura. Sorry, I'm just sitting here saying goodbye, and I'll put it up just now. There's always something I do each week wrong with the buttons. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for watching. Bye,
Bye.
Laura.